Well, good morning, everyone. I'm meteorologist Katie Fehlinger, and thanks for joining us on this special web chat here on CBSPhilly.com and also on Facebook, where you can check it out as well. We're talking all about flooding this time around. So we've spent the whole week discussing different kinds of severe weather: tornadoes, lightning, wind, hail. Today, it is all flooding all the time, and most specifically flash flooding. So not only are we going to discuss how this is forecasted, the kind of products that are issued by the National Weather Service, but also some statistics, and most importantly, action items for you, so you can know exactly how you need to be prepared should a flood strike your area, and also whether you could be more at risk of flooding, especially with your property. So what is flooding? It really is as basic as it sounds. It's that temporary overflow of water that can be anything from a few inches to as high as your rooftop. So it just depends on the event, obviously. This is caused by so many different things: heavy rain, snow melt, coastal storms, storm surge, waterway overflow, breaks in dams and levees, ice jams, debris. Am I missing anything? Wastewater systems, hurricanes, so many different reasons that you can see flooding take place, and it can be incredibly dangerous. It can be slow, and that would be your classic just flooding, or it can be very quick and hit you before you can even react, and that's flash flooding. So when these watches, advisories, warnings do come out, it's really important that you pay close attention to them. When can they happen? Well, pretty much at any time during the year. There are certain times of year that our area is greater at risk. The New Jersey and the Delaware coastline, most specifically during hurricane season, run at least a more vulnerable risk to flooding and flash flooding as well. And anywhere from June to November, of course, is when hurricane season runs. But then also ice jamming, and this is something that it doesn't come around all the time, but it has come around in recent winters. And anytime during the winter or toward early spring, especially as thawing takes place, ice chunks that have iced over higher up on the rivers, they break apart, they start to flow down, and they get caught up. And we've seen this take place at a specific location on the Delaware River, right around the Trenton area, in multiple different seasons. It just happened this past January, if you recall, and it actually took place right where the river is affected by the tide. So right from Trenton down to Chester is where the Delaware River is. It's affected by the tides. The further upstream you go, it's not. But that's almost always where these ice jams tend to occur. It's interesting the way it tends to happen. Let's talk about a couple of stats, and I'll ask the director to head into the graphics if we could. So we're going to just take a look at some of these numbers here that come along with flooding statistics. 5,000. This is the average number of floods that hit the nation each year. That is a lot of flooding, obviously. 126, the number of flood-related deaths in the United States in just 2016 alone. Interesting side note, more than half of all flooding deaths actually occur in vehicles. So this is really important. You never, ever should drive around a barricade. It is obviously up for a reason, and it's one of those things where you may drive that road every single day. You may think you know exactly what a road is like, and underneath that water, simply put, you just don't know at that point. So it's always important to respect the barricades. Other numbers to talk about. Forgive me if I'm taking pauses here. I'm trying to keep a close watch on what's happening with our Facebook page, and if any questions come in, I want to keep you on top of those as well. But let's look to the next number. 90 is the next number, and that is the percentage of all U.S. natural disasters declared by the president that involve flooding of some kind, and that makes flooding the most widespread natural disaster aside from wildfires. It's pretty astounding. The next number up is 20, and that's height. This is height in feet. Flash floods, believe this or not, can bring rushing walls of water as high as 20 feet. They are so incredibly dangerous. And we'll wrap up this number here with just a big old goose egg: 0. That is the number of U.S. regions that are actually safe from flooding. So obviously no one is immune to flooding, and you're especially vulnerable too if you live in a low-lying area near water or downstream from a dam. So that leads to floodplain. You know, we think about this word floodplain, and you may have the question, do I live in one? Well, it just depends. It depends on elevation, how close or adjacent you are to a stream or a river, or if you're downstream from a dam or a levee. So all of these things do play into it. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we move forward in this web chat. Let's also talk about the power of this flood water. It's one thing to cause damage. It's another thing to deal with the danger involved here. You know, only a half a foot of water can just render your vehicle completely uncontrollable. You know, you lose control of your vehicle. What can you do? There's nothing. You'll be stuck. But 6 inches of water could also knock you over. So it's even more important that you don't drive into this, because if you were to get stalled out, you don't want to be standing in that water trying to escape from it. So it really just doesn't take much. And when you think about 6 inches of water in a flash flood, or any flood really, think about this. You're not necessarily dealing with 6 inches of water from the total rain or whatever it is that's causing this. This can easily pool and accumulate if it's, you know, say an inch per hour rainfall that's coming through, and it's coming in over near the Schuylkill River, right along Montgomery Drive. If you can think about that spot with me, right where it meets Montgomery Drive, or right across the river into Kelly Drive, very susceptible to flooding on these streets, because you're so close to the water, and it's going to flow out of its banks pretty easily. So it will not take much to rack up those kinds of accumulations. 12 inches of water will float most cars. So that too, it obviously renders you pretty much helpless, and you don't want to be floating away, but even 2 feet of water will just completely take your car away. So really important stuff to follow. And just to reiterate it, you know, if you did drive into a floodwater and you needed to be rescued, you're putting their lives at risk. So this is more of a web chat about being proactive and preventative, and making sure that you know the steps to take and what not to do should flash flooding strike. I am going to take a minute here to refresh my page. I want to make sure that I'm not missing any questions here. And I'm also going to double check in on our Facebook page as I'm talking to you here. Now, should a flash flood or any kind of flood watch or advisory get issued, what are you supposed to do with that information? Well, basically, a flood watch just means that it's time to get set. It's time to be prepared that something is possible with flooding. So you want to be checking in with us. Check in with CBS3. Check in with CBSPhilly.com. We have our sister station, the CW Philly, as well. If we had to go over there for coverage as well, we're available. And then, of course, through our social channels here on Facebook, here on our website. And we are also still in partnership with KYW News Radio, and we go there live, and we've got your forecast updates all day long with them. So there are multiple ways that just we as a weather team can keep you prepared for all of this. But you do need to prepare to potentially move to higher ground if you're in one of these lower lying areas, or maybe if your property perhaps sits in one of these lower lying areas, and just stay weather ready. So again, keeping in contact with what is happening in your area is always important. Now, what if it's a warning? Well, that basically means that something is imminent, or it is already occurring, whether it's flash flooding or just plain flooding. These graphics, by the way, I just want to pay credit to where it is due, did come from the National Weather Service and NOAA. So thanks to them for providing these social media-esque outlets for us to provide this information to you in graphical form. But yeah, you want to be using certainly extra caution if you're driving and there's a flood or flash flood warning out there. You do need to pay close attention to what the conditions are looking like. And always check in with the traffic reports, because they will have the most up-to-the-minute information as well as to whether flooding is causing any problems. Of course, of course, you want to keep checking those forecast updates and stay weather ready. Let's see if we've got any more questions here. As of yet, none that I am finding. I hope I'm not missing any. But keep them coming. If they are coming in, I'd love to hear from you guys. Let's move on from this one. So if watches warnings are issued, one more thing I would add actually to this is that if you don't already have an emergency kit for flooding, it's a good idea to just get one ready. It's pretty basic stuff. All you really need to have are a flashlight, some batteries, some cash, and some first aid supplies. I will talk a lot more too about protecting your property in a little bit here, but yeah, emergency kit is a smart thing to just have on hand. We are certainly prone to flooding here, and as we mentioned a moment ago, we are also in the United States where anyone can see flooding. No one really is immune to this, but you are. Since we're a city, we're Philadelphia, we're a city surrounded by rivers, we've got a coastline in Delaware, in New Jersey. We are definitely used to seeing flooding events in our area. Let's move it along here. We'll take you into the forecasting that goes into flooding. So actually, if we can come on back to me on full screen, that would be fantastic. Thanks, guys, in the control EM. So the National Weather Service, of course, is the government. They are the ones that are going to be issuing the official advisories, watches, warnings that come out when it comes to flooding or flash flooding. And it's interesting, I just a couple of weeks ago had the good fortune and opportunity to attend an integrated warning team workshop over at our regional National Weather Service headquarters. They're based in Mount Holly, New Jersey, and it was a fantastic day's worth of events where we all sat together, media personnel, me from CBS 3, and then other folks from other stations in the market, as well as emergency personnel and all of the National Weather Service personnel. We're all in one room and talking about how we get messages out to everyone else to understand what the risks are when it comes to any kind of weather event that's going on. But interestingly, specific to flooding, they will now issue, and you may have seen it this past Monday, you'll now get a text alert to your phone if there's a flash flood warning. There are other significant events that they will also send out a text warning, but they worry about putting out too many of these warnings. So for severe thunderstorm warnings, things like that, you may not receive a text alert, but for a flash flood warning, because it's so dangerous, you will. Also tsunami, which of course is relatively rare, but it's possible. Also tornadoes. Those are some of the alerts that you would receive from the National Weather Service. But just sort of an interesting side note that flash flooding also to the National Weather Service is an incredibly dangerous threat and is definitely something that needs to be taken seriously and into account. So they, of course, issue these watches, these warnings and advisories, and they have a lot to think about in this Delaware Valley when they're forecasting flooding. They really take the time and care before they're going to hit that warning button. We are always looking at different microclimates here in the Delaware Valley. We have the urban areas, Philadelphia proper, and surrounding communities that are very heavily populated, very much covered in concrete jungles. Then you've also got the elevation. The Poconos are right nearby up the Northeast Extension and other hills as you head out towards central Pennsylvania. And then you've also got tidal issues. So out near the shore, we've got coastal climatology to keep in mind. So we have all of these microclimates, and they all really play their own significant roles in whether flooding is even an issue and needs to be warned for, or if it's going to occur in the first place. So these are all really important things to keep in mind. And if we can head back to the graphics, I'll show you some other factors that do play into this. So if we can, there we go. We go full screen on this one. What kind of factors play into this? On top of the climatology that we have here in the Delaware Valley, how much rain is actually going to fall? How intense is that rain going to fall? All make a difference in whether it's flash flooding or just flooding. It all makes a difference in whether you'll see it at all, obviously. If you have a 1 to 2 inch rainfall rate per hour and you end up with the drenching rain that's going to last 3 hours, that will absolutely be a flooding event. The conditions that lead up to the rain event itself. So let's say before this particular batch of rain had come in, you 3 days ago had another really drenching rain come in. You're very likely to have just too much saturation in the ground that it will in fact lead to flooding. So things like that. The time of year plays a role in this too. As we get into the spring and the summer month, things like vegetation actually play a role in mitigating flooding because they can help soak up in the vegetation. They can help soak up that rain and at least mitigate the potential of flooding. And then even evaporation can play a role to help mitigate it when it gets warmer out. But then there are also things like melting snow and frozen ground that would lead to runoff. So if you've got a completely frozen ground, there's nothing for that rain to seep into, and you'll encounter this kind of a problem a lot of times in the springtime months or at least late winter, where it's not quite warm enough just yet. You still have enough frozen ground that it can lead to, with the first, good springtime rain, some decent flooding or even a flash flooding. Okay, so let's move things along here and we'll take a look at specifically flash flood safety. Okay, so we talk about how we forecast it. We talk about the, watches, warnings, advisories that come out. And well, now what? What am I supposed to do with that information? Stay safe. And here are the ways that you can do that. I know this graphic may be a little small, but hopefully if you are watching us on a small screen, you can maybe zoom in on it. You do want to get to higher ground. Get out of these areas that are subject to the flooding. Of course, do not drive into that water. as we've mentioned, I mean, the protocol really is turn it around, do not, turn around, don't drown. That's what the National Weather Service protocol is, and we will harp on that. It really is dangerous. Just don't do it. That's all there is to it. And of course, stay informed. And as I mentioned, multiple ways for you to do that here with us, CBS 3. CBSphilly.com, our Facebook pages, and other social channels, and then KYW News Radio for additional updates. And we are running weather 8 times every hour on that station, too, if you happen to be driving when this is going on and you need an update, but you can't look at a screen at the moment. So that's how you're going to stay safe. And just keeping in mind, again, that it doesn't take very much for your vehicle to be rendered just uncontrollable. But how are you supposed to really prepare for all of this? Well, there are multiple ways that you can protect your stuff, yourself, your property, and this is just a short list. We're going to go into a lot more detail of how to prepare and protect your own home and the stuff that's in it. But are you located in a floodplain? That is one of the first questions you need to be thinking about, and hopefully if you do, you've thought about flood insurance. But a floodplain essentially means that you are, again, adjacent to a stream or a river or a water source, downstream from a dam, something like that, or also elevation playing a role in this, since it is lower, certainly, as you get closer to the water. But that's something really important to know. If you are unsure if your property is in a floodplain, a couple of places that you can find that information out, and I would advise you to head to floodsmart.gov. Floodsmart, all one word, .gov, and there's an interactive map in which you can find out that information. Really important stuff with us, again, being in an area that certainly is prone to flooding, given all of the different waterways that we do have here in this local area. In addition, you need to know the answer to these things. What's the fastest way to get to higher ground? You may find yourself having to go on foot to get to higher ground. You may not be able to drive away. So have a plan already set in your head should something come up that you can escape if you needed to. And then what roads nearby are most likely to flood? There are certain places, if you've been in this area long enough, there are certain places that are without question going to flood out, even if there's just a moderate to heavy rain that comes through for a couple of hours. Places like parts of Cobbs Creek, parts of, as we mentioned, Kelly Drive, parts of Martin Luther King Drive. If there's a particularly heavy rain like we had last Monday, that will easily flood out parts of MLK Drive for a couple of hours. There's just certain expectations when it comes to these certain spots, because they are very, very prone as they sit in the floodplain, and they can really flood out very, very easily. I'm having trouble actually loading any questions, so I'm going to keep trying to refresh the page here and see if anything does come in here. Oh, here's one that came in just a couple of seconds ago. Before we get to this one, before we get to this graphic and talk about how you can protect your stuff, I'll detail this a lot more for you in a second. But somebody wants to know if towns have a plan in place for flooding. I do not know the exact answer to that question, but I cannot imagine that the towns that know this is a possibility would not. I do know that Philadelphia specifically, and our Office of Emergency Management, works with multiple organizations, through the water folks, through the streets crews. They have a lot of different people within just the city's organization to plan for this kind of stuff here in our own city, since we do definitely get in on flooding down near Columbus Boulevard and whatnot, since we are so close to the rivers on every single side of the city, really. What are the most susceptible areas of the Delaware Valley that could flood? Matt sending that one in to us. Thanks for that question, Matt. Again, this goes back to the floodplain, and the closer you are to the water, the more easily you'll be susceptible to this. It's important to once more note that, and we can come back full screen, or come back rather to me, I'm sorry. Just since we'll get to the protect your stuff in a minute here. But yeah, the most susceptible places in the Delaware Valley are really just the ones that are closest to the water. Again, floodsmart.gov has this fantastic interactive map that you can go in and just input your location that you're interested in, and it's going to give you a gridded format of information and whether you are at risk, a huge legend of different variables that play into that, and how much it would take for your area to get flooded. So it's a really great interactive tool, but I'll tell you this much. You got the Schuylkill, you got the Delaware, you got the ocean, you got the bays, and all of these different rivers that are feeding into it. we are, just generally speaking, susceptible to flooding here in our area. We have places like the Pinelands that are very heavily wooded and can withstand flooding, I think, a little bit more easily, or heavy rain, I should say, a little bit more easily. But if that particular area of South Central New Jersey has been inundated with rain in recent days, it hasn't had a chance to drain or evaporate. And there's a strong possibility that even there, even despite those mitigating factors, that zone could still end up with some flooding. So it's one of those case by case kind of basis. But yes, the closer you are to water, the more vulnerable you will absolutely be. Let me see if we've got one more question here that I can answer for anyone. Okay. Let's head back to the graphics, guys. Want to check out, again, some really good action item type stuff here. Now what? What am I supposed to do with this information? Well, most importantly, you want to be protecting yourself, your family, but also your stuff. If you're a homeowner, that gets to be a very, very big price tag with flood damage. It is so incredibly costly to repair and replace water damaged stuff. So when it comes to valuables and irreplaceable things like your pictures, that kind of thing, you want to actually take pictures of your valuables for insurance purposes. Should you lose them, you've got proof. Move your family photos, the ones you do not want to lose, upstairs. If you have them in your basement or even on the first floor, just depending on how your home is set up, you could lose them. And insurance obviously is not going to be able to replace your memories. Store your important documents in a waterproof container. Personally, mine, my husband's, my kids' birth certificates, all of our social cards, and really important stuff. Other important things like vehicle titles. They go into a lockbox, a burn-proof lockbox, and they sit on the highest floor of our house in a closet. So it's important to make sure that you have all of those in one place that is basically indestructible, like a lockbox that is waterproof and burn-proof. So have that kind of thing on hand. In addition, you can also create digital versions of these documents and then just put those on a secure thumb drive. That would be a good move. You want to keep valuables out of the basement so that they're out of floodwaters' way as well. So, again, moving things up as high as you can is always just pretty much a protocol and a good thing to do. Flood insurance is a smart idea. If you are near one of these spots, near the rivers or near the shore, and you are vulnerable to flooding, flood insurance will obviously help to protect you. And it's important to go over with your agent what kind of protection do you actually need. And if you do live at the shore, a supply of sandbags is a smart move. Have them ready, especially the closer you get out to the immediate shoreline. When hurricane season rolls around, you're going to see some of those, some of the erosion that can get caused by that storm surge and the winds really do damage to the protection that's put up there. Plywood is a good thing to have on hand. Plastic sheeting, some lumber. This is all just to help you protect your home and to protect your valuables. Let's move on to number 2. A lot of information within each of these subcategories. Number 2 is specific to utilities. So you want to see if you can raise or elevate important home systems. Electrical panels, your water heater, your furnace. If you're able to raise those up, that will actually help you out because the water won't be able to reach them. And hopefully you won't have to suffer any damage from that. You want to also see if you can keep your sump pump in working order with battery backup. That is important for the very obvious reasons. And what's interesting too is just financially speaking, that utilities are the #1 reason that people file claims. And it is most typically one of the things that people have to pay out of pocket, which really stinks because your claim ends up being less than or equal to your deductible and you end up having to pay for it anyway. So these are ways that you can at least hopefully proactively protect your stuff in advance. Matt has another question. If you can't evacuate the area, what do you do in the event of a flood? I think more than anything, obviously the answer here is going to be not so much a yes or no question or a very specific answer, but you just have to be weather aware, essentially. You got to check in. You got to know what the situation is like in your area. And since we are in an area that is prone to this, keeping tabs on what's going to happen or systems that are moving in and when you need to be checking back in to see how things have progressed. If you're not, a weather geek like we are on the team and you're not constantly analyzing and looking at these things, you have to have an idea in place of when you're going to be checking in so you know better. Because obviously the worst thing that could happen is that you would end up stuck And God forbid, if it's a really bad flood and you're talking about buildings underwater, then they need to be sending out boats to you and getting rescue teams involved in that. So that's the last thing that we would want to ever see happen to anybody. If you know that, especially shore dwellers, if you know that there is a hurricane coming, you really just need to pay attention and know what is happening there. Let's go back to this graphic and continue our talk about homeowners specifically. You know, something else that you can do in your basement, if you have one, is to seal the walls and also install those check valves. So the things that they open up to allow the flow out, but they'll close when that flow reverses. So hopefully that would at least limit any water rushing back in on you. So again, sealing walls is always a good idea. That would hopefully limit any water damage that you would suffer. And if you do remodel, especially within the basement, this also goes back to insurance. Check with your agent to make sure that those improvements are covered, because that would really stink if you redid your basement and all of a sudden there's a flood that comes and ruins it all and you can't get it covered. And finally, educate yourself. That was also on the graphic that we had up ad nauseum, so I won't make you go back to it. But sign up for your local weather alerts. You know, we have a CBS Philly weather app. It is fantastic. It will show you incoming radar, future radar, hourly conditions. You'll have video opportunities to see all of the most up-to-date and recent forecasts that the team has put out. So that's everything from my stuff in the morning to Kate at night. And you can see the most up-to-date details. In addition, I mentioned that those websites, you got to learn about your flood risk. I think knowing is to coin or to, I guess, mimic a cheap cliche, knowing is everything, or knowing is at least half the battle in this case. So if you know what your flood risk is and whether you live on a floodplain, that is going to be incredibly helpful to you to be able to then take these additional steps to protect yourself and your stuff. So floodsmart.gov, look there to check out the map for your floodplain status, and then also just general information at ready.gov/floods will help you out. And finally, you can come on back to me here in the Weather Center. One last thing is that after a flood, should it occur, after that happens, don't return to your home until local authorities say it is safe. Even after floodwaters recede, roads, bridges could be weak. They could collapse. And I think we saw a lot of that safety net put in by authorities after hurricanes like Sandy and others. So they are not willy-nilly going to put in these restrictions. Yeah, it stinks. It really is a hassle, and it is a pain to try to find a reroute if you get detoured by flooding. But it's there for a reason. You just have to adhere by it. You know, again, things like buildings could actually be unstable. Your drinking water could even be contaminated if it's a bad enough flood. I mean, we saw this with previous storms in Texas, in Puerto Rico. They're still cleaning up months and months later. So you just want to use common sense and exercise caution. So that sort of, I think, is the overall theme of at least preparedness when it comes to flooding. I'm starting to run low on time. We use the studio nonstop. We've got a satellite interview coming up here, but let me see if I can get no more questions on this side here. But guys, thank you so much for submitting those questions. I hope you took something away from this. Thankfully, we don't have any flooding in this forecast right now, but there is rain on the way. So I'll be back for you on CBS 3 at noon to tell you about that and also when it's going to be arriving. In the meantime, thanks for hanging out with me for the last half hour, and I hope you were able to learn something new. Take care, guys.